In the annals of America's greatest wealth, there exists a pivotal juncture where aspirations that forged empires clash violently with the havoc that extraordinary riches wreaks upon the soul. During the Gilded Age, this clash spawned some of history's most catastrophic personal downfalls. These women commanded everything their society professed to cherish: allure that sparked fashion movements, wit that enchanted heads of state and royalty, and entry to worlds beyond ordinary comprehension. Their residences were palatial estates, their transportation private railway cars, and their social power spanned oceans. But lurking beneath these seemingly flawless existences was a grimmer reality about the price of unbridled privilege. Seclusion masking itself as distinction, fear parading as discretion, and anguish concealed beneath philanthropic galas bred a poisonous atmosphere where psychological torment thrived and genuine human bonds became virtually unattainable. Their spectacular descents matched their meteoric rises, demonstrating that in America, even the most meticulously assembled fortunes cannot shield one from the inherent frailties of being human. Gladys Deacon, Duchess of Marlborough. During Belle Epoque era's zenith, Gladys Deacon mesmerized the cultural aristocracy through an extraordinary fusion of stunning beauty and formidable intelligence. Her appeal extended beyond high society to encompass some of her era's most brilliant intellectuals. Her story serves as a sobering testament that even when you're considered Europe's most beautiful woman, pursued by literary luminaries and commemorated by master sculptors, one vain decision can destroy everything, transforming a venerated socialite into a heartbreaking figure who perishes isolated and abandoned in a psychiatric facility. Marcel Proust composed passionate correspondence extolling her loveliness. Auguste Rodin crafted sculptural homages to her beauty. And across 15 years, she orchestrated the most deliberate aristocratic courtship in history to secure a duke's hand. Yet one catastrophic cosmetic intervention initiated a decades-long descent from palatial chambers to asylum walls, demonstrating that beauty and brilliance provide no shield against fixation or madness. Gladys Deacon's existence stands as the quintessential warning tale, a chilling portrait of how early trauma, perfectionism, and narcissism can dismantle even the most luminous fates. In this episode of Old Money Allure, we examine the ascent and heartbreaking collapse of a woman who possessed everything and surrendered it all. Certain individuals inherit scandal, but Gladys Marie Deacon suffered the misfortune of having scandal literally detonate throughout her youth in the most theatrical manner conceivable. Entering the world February 7th, 1881 in Paris to affluent American expatriates, Edward Parker Deacon and Florence Baldwin, Gladys appeared fated for a life of refined conventionality among the fashionable American colony in Belle Epoque in France. Her father prospered as a Boston textile magnate, while her mother descended from Admiral Charles H. Baldwin, precisely the sort of distinguished American elite dominating expatriate social spheres. Throughout her initial 11 years, Gladys experienced the enchanted existence of a prosperous American child overseas, circulating among the uppermost social strata and obtaining the finest education wealth could secure. But February 19, 1892 shattered her youthful innocence permanently when her father perpetrated one of European high society's most sensational crimes. Edward Parker Deacon had uncovered his wife Florence's torrid liaison with a French paramour named Émile Abel, and his reaction proved both immediate and lethal. Brandishing a revolver and possessed by fury, Edward demolished Florence's apartment door at the esteemed Hotel Splendid in Cannes, discovering the terrified Frenchman attempting concealment behind furniture. Without pause, Edward discharged 3 bullets from his weapon, murdering Abel instantaneously and generating a scandal that dominated European publications for months. The homicide reverberated throughout the international social establishment, where the Deacons had represented a model American household, living the refined European fantasy. Edward faced immediate arrest and murder charges, though his fortune and influence ultimately secured a manslaughter conviction and fewer than 4 months' imprisonment. The scandal utterly annihilated the Deacon family's standing and left 11-year-old Gladys traumatized from witnessing her parents' marriage violently terminated and the subsequent public disgrace. Following the murder proceedings, Gladys's parents divorced in 1893, with custody initially granted to Edward, despite his recent homicide conviction. However, Florence abducted Gladys from the convent in Auteuil, where she'd been placed during Edward's incarceration, igniting a fierce custody dispute. Edward transported Gladys and her sisters to America in 1893, establishing themselves in Newport, Rhode Island, where Gladys received exceptional education and tutoring in 7 languages. Despite her remarkable intellect, one instructor called her a genius brain. The trauma of her father's crime continued plaguing the family, as Edward's psychological state rapidly deteriorated. By 1899, Edward's mental condition had grown so precarious that he was committed to McLean Hospital for the Insane in Massachusetts, where he expired in 1901. Her father's institutionalization and death profoundly impacted Gladys, who would spend her remaining years terrified of inheriting his mental fragility, a fear proving tragically prescient. But first, she would deploy her beauty and intellect to conquer Europe in ways making her the most celebrated woman of her generation, before vanity and obsession demolished everything she'd constructed. Returning to Europe as a wealthy orphan bearing a scandalous history, Gladys was poised to demonstrate that beauty merged with tragedy creates an irresistible elixir for those seeking to dominate high society. Her fusion of exceptional intelligence, breathtaking appearance, and tragic background rendered her absolutely captivating to Paris, London, and Rome's cultural elite during the Belle Époque era's peak. Gladys possessed what contemporaries characterized as radiant beauty, featuring remarkable blue-green eyes that became her most celebrated attribute and countless artistic tributes focus. Marcel Proust, the literary colossus of his age, was thoroughly bewitched, writing with transparent infatuation. "I never saw a girl with such beauty, such magnificent intelligence, such goodness and charm." The distinguished art critic Bernard Berenson grew so captivated by Gladys that he earnestly contemplated marrying her, while his wife Mary documented her conflicted impressions. "To beautiful, cruel, selfish, untrained, what will become of her?" Gladys became the quintessential artist's inspiration, earning recognition as her era's most painted woman by modeling for Europe's premier creators. The celebrated portraitist Giovanni Boldini executed several magnificent portraits, including an acclaimed 1908 painting now residing in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Sculptor Jacob Epstein created a splendid bust of her in 1917, presently in Jerusalem's Israel Museum, while Auguste Rodin presented her with one of his creations as testament to his admiration. Her social sphere encompassed some of the period's most powerful figures, and she received courtship from various dukes and princes, including Prussia's crown prince, who bestowed a ring that Kaiser Wilhelm II subsequently demanded be relinquished. But at her beauty and social triumph's zenith, Gladys made a choice that would plague her eternally and ultimately obliterate everything she'd labored to accomplish. 1903, aged 22, she became fixated on what she perceived as a minor aesthetic imperfection, a subtle indentation between her nose bridge and forehead. Despite universal acclaim for her beauty, Gladys devoted hours examining classical Greek statuary proportions in Roman museums, measuring distances between features to comprehend perfect facial parameters. Inspired by the classical proportions she'd obsessively studied, Gladys chose to undergo a primitive cosmetic procedure involving paraffin wax injection into her nose to create what she believed would constitute the perfect Grecian profile. The objective was forming a straight line from forehead to nose tip, achieving the classical ideal that had consumed her thoughts and dominated her self-perception. The paraffin wax injection, performed when plastic surgery remained in its absolute infancy, proved catastrophically ruinous, destroying her life. The wax, intended to remain permanently positioned, began migrating and liquefying over time, gradually relocating from its original placement and creating increasingly distorted facial characteristics. What had aimed to enhance her legendary beauty instead transformed her into a grotesque parody of her former self, as the migrating wax eventually accumulated in her jaw and cheeks. The once perfect features that had captivated Proust and Rodin were gradually metamorphosed into what observers would later describe as a terrifying apparition bearing no resemblance to her former splendor. But Gladys had invested too many years plotting the ultimate social conquest to permit facial disfigurement to derail her pursuit of the British aristocratic marriage market's greatest prize. For 15 years, Gladys had conducted European high society's most patient and merciless romantic campaign, and she wouldn't allow melting paraffin wax to obstruct her pursuit of a duke. This fixation commenced when she was merely 14 and learned about the duke's 1895 marriage to American heiress Consuelo Vanderbilt, prompting her diary entry, "Oh dear, if only I was a little older, I might catch him yet." Her strategy proved both patient and ruthless. She befriended Consuelo Vanderbilt and became a regular Blenheim Palace visitor, where she could observe the unhappy marriage firsthand and position herself as the ideal alternative. The Duke's marriage to Consuelo had been a characteristic Gilded Age transaction. He required the Vanderbilt millions for Blenheim Palace restoration, while her mother desired her daughter's transformation into a duchess, and neither loved the other. Gladys's friendship with the miserable Consuelo provided intimate access to the Duke's realm and allowed her to present herself as everything his wife wasn't: intellectually stimulating, romantically accessible, and genuinely interested in him personally. By 1912, Gladys had successfully become the Duke's mistress, initiating an affair lasting nearly 20 years, and essentially making her Blenheim Palace's unofficial mistress. The relationship proceeded with the aristocratic openness common in elite circles where extramarital affairs were tolerated, provided they were managed with appropriate discretion and sophistication. After years of legal maneuvering, the Duke and Consuelo finally obtained divorce in 1921, clearing Gladys's path to achieve her ultimate ambition. June 25, 1921, aged 40 but claiming 35 on the marriage certificate, Gladys finally married Charles Spencer Churchill, 9th Duke of Marlborough, in a Parisian ceremony. She wore a gold tissue gown specially woven in Italy with a veil strategically concealing her increasingly disfigured features. While the marriage generated international headlines, married life at Blenheim Palace proved nothing like the fairy tale Gladys had envisioned during her 15-year ducal pursuit. The couple were fundamentally incompatible in temperament and interests, and the Duke grew increasingly repelled by his wife's deteriorating appearance and progressively erratic conduct. Gladys's behavior became increasingly disturbing and unpredictable, including making outrageous comments at social functions and once placing a revolver upon the dinner table while threatening to shoot her husband. She kept a revolver in her bedroom, preventing the Duke's entry, and her paranoia and eccentric behavior rendered her an impossible companion for a man valuing aristocratic dignity above all else. One of the most damaging aspects of Gladys's tenure as Duchess was her fixation on breeding Blenheim Spaniels, which she allowed to overrun the palace and inflict extensive damage upon recently restored interiors. The dogs destroyed carpets, furnishings, and priceless artwork, horrifying the Duke, while Gladys apparently preferred their company to humans. Winston Churchill, the Duke's cousin and frequent visitor, initially found her intriguing, but eventually grew bored and irritated by her company, describing her social circle as strange, glittering beings with whom I have little or nothing in common. By the early 1930s, the Duke had reached his patience's absolute limit with his wife's conduct and began planning the most humiliating conclusion to a fairy tale marriage in aristocratic history. What transpired next would transform the Duchess of Marlborough from palace royalty into a reclusive madwoman who would perish forgotten and isolated in a mental institution. The fairy tale that consumed 15 years of Gladys's orchestration was ending with the kind of spectacular public humiliation, making modern celebrity divorces appear civilized by comparison. He departed first, abandoning Gladys alone in the vast mansion with her pack of unruly spaniels, but eventually returned with legal authority compelling her complete removal from the property. The eviction was executed with ruthless efficiency, and Gladys was compelled to abandon most possessions, banished from the Rouen palace that had been her residence for over a decade. The sole permanent reminders of her Blenheim Palace tenure were the two Sphinx sculptures bearing her features on the west terraces and the mysterious giant blue eyes she'd commissioned, painted on the portico ceiling. The Duke of Marlborough died in 1934, merely 1 year after evicting his wife, leaving Gladys as the Dowager Duchess of Marlborough, but with no intention of ever resuming public life. Instead, she commenced the extended retreat from society characterizing her final 4 decades, relocating to a Chacombe farm in Oxfordshire, where she lived under the assumed name Mrs. Spencer. At Chacombe, Gladys transformed into a complete recluse, existing in increasingly squalid circumstances, surrounded by her beloved dogs and the few possessions she'd managed salvaging from her aristocratic past. She became a local curiosity known for dressing eccentrically in a boiler suit cinched with sacking, an old straw hat, and Wellington boots studded with red puncture repair patches, making her resemble a deranged scarecrow. Local children, convinced she was a witch, would hurl stones at her house and taunt her, prompting Gladys to retaliate by confronting them with a shotgun, though she claimed it was unloaded. Her behavior grew increasingly erratic and paranoid as she would telephone strangers at midnight or wander her property at odd hours, creating genuine concerns about her mental stability. The transformation from celebrated duchess to isolated eccentric was so complete that when conservative MP Henry Chips Channon encountered her in a Bond Street jewelry shop in 1943, he barely recognized the grotesque figure before him. Channon described witnessing an extraordinary marionette of a woman, or was it a man, wearing gray flannel trousers, a wide leather belt, masculine overcoat, and a man's brown felt hat, and had a really frightening appearance. When Channon attempted introducing himself, Gladys looked at him with vacant eyes and muttered, "Je ne suis pas Madame la Duchesse," before fleeing the shop in terror, completely denying her own identity. By 1962, Gladys's behavior had grown so erratic and potentially dangerous that authorities could no longer disregard her deteriorating condition and the risk she posed to herself and others. At age 81, she was forcibly committed to St. Andrew's Hospital in Northampton, a psychiatric facility where she would spend her final 15 years in the psycho-geriatric ward. Despite her confinement, Gladys retained considerable intellectual capacity and continued reading voraciously, though she was clearly aware of her circumstances and the dramatic fall from her former glory. During her St. Andrew's Hospital years, young Hugo Vickers discovered her existence and became her sole regular visitor, visiting her 65 times over 2 years before her death. When Vickers asked her, "Where is Gladys Deacon?" she replied slowly and sadly, "Gladys Deacon, she never existed," essentially erasing her own identity and legacy. October 13th, 1977, aged 96, Gladys Deacon died alone in St. Andrew's Hospital, marking one of the 20th century's most extraordinary and tragic lives' conclusion. Her life embodies the cruel paradox of the Gilded Age, where unprecedented wealth and social mobility coexisted with rigid beauty standards and limited options for even the most privileged women. Her story reveals how the era's obsession with classical perfection and aristocratic status could corrupt even the most intelligent minds, transforming natural gifts into sources of self-destruction. In pursuing an impossible ideal of beauty and social position, she represents countless women who sacrificed authentic happiness for society's shallow definitions of success. Perhaps most haunting is how Gladys's final denial of her own existence, she never existed, reflected a deeper truth about the emptiness of a life built entirely on external validation. Her transformation from celebrated muse to forgotten patient illustrates the ultimate futility of defining oneself through others' admiration, whether from artists, aristocrats, or society at large. The sphinxes at Blenheim Palace may preserve her features in stone, but they also serve as monuments to the danger of mistaking appearance for identity, beauty for worth, and conquest for love. Evelyn Walsh McLean. In 1911, a mining heiress with more courage than caution acquired the world's most notorious diamond. The 45-carat blue stone had already carved a trail of shattered lives across continents. French kings beheaded, millionaires bankrupted, royalty driven mad. But Evelyn Walsh McLean, daughter of a Colorado gold miner, merely laughed at tales of ancient curses. She let her Great Dane wear the Hope Diamond like a trinket and flaunted it at baseball games, declaring herself immune to its dark history. Within decades, she would bury 2 children, watch her husband descend into madness, lose her family fortune, and discover, perhaps too late, why centuries of owners had feared the seductive blue light at the heart of her precious gem. In the rugged San Juan Mountains of Colorado, where prospectors sought their fortunes in the late 1800s, Thomas Walsh made the discovery that would transform his family's future. The Campbird Mine, rich with gold and silver veins, proved one of the era's most profitable discoveries, elevating the Walsh family from modest means to extraordinary wealth during America's Gilded Age. Born in 1886, Evelyn Walsh's early years coincided with her family's remarkable ascent. Her father's journey from Irish immigrant to wealthy mine owner embodied the American dream, unfolding during a time when new industrial fortunes were reshaping the nation's social landscape. Thomas Walsh's success meant his daughter would mature in circumstances vastly different from his own humble beginnings. The Walsh family's newfound wealth opened doors that would have been firmly sealed to them just years earlier. Thomas Walsh, mindful of his daughter's future, invested in her education in Washington, D.C., where the family eventually established their residence. This relocation from Colorado's mining towns to the nation's capital marked a significant transition in young Evelyn's life. As she matured, Evelyn's world expanded beyond the western frontier of her early childhood. The family's relocation to Washington, D.C. positioned them at American society and politics' heart. Here, among the capital's established families, the Walshes made their mark, not merely through their mining fortune, but through their active participation in the city's social and cultural life. In this environment, Evelyn met Edward "Ned" McLean, heir to the Washington Post publishing empire. Their courtship captured public attention, representing a union between 2 of America's prominent families. The impending marriage promised to combine the Walsh mining fortune with the McLean publishing empire, creating a union of considerable social and financial significance. Their 1908 wedding reflected both families' wealth scale. Each set of parents gave the couple $100,000 to purchase their own wedding presents, an extraordinary sum for the time, demonstrating both families' immense prosperity. The gesture spoke to the wealth magnitude that would shape Evelyn's adult life and influence her future decisions. As the newlyweds embarked on their life together, neither could have anticipated how their future would become entwined with one of history's most famous gems. 2 years after their wedding in 1910, they would encounter Pierre Cartier, a French jeweler who possessed a remarkable blue diamond. The 45.52-carat stone known as the Hope Diamond would soon capture Evelyn's imagination. The circumstances that would bring this extraordinary gem into Evelyn's possession and the role it would play in her life were about to unfold as she stood on the threshold of her new life as Mrs. McLean, entering a chapter that would define not just her own story, but the next stage in the Hope Diamond's long and storied journey through history. The first 2 years of Evelyn and Ned McLean's marriage unfolded against America's wealthiest social circle's backdrop. With their combined family fortunes, the young couple enjoyed a lifestyle of exceptional privilege, dividing their time between Washington, D.C.'s social season and extended travels abroad. In 1910, while the McLeans were staying at their Paris hotel, Pierre Cartier arranged a meeting to show them an extraordinary gem, the Hope Diamond. Cartier, already renowned as a jeweler to European royalty and American millionaires, had recently acquired the stone and recognized the McLeans as potential buyers who could afford such a significant purchase. The 45.52-carat deep blue diamond that Cartier presented was distinctive not only for its size and color but also for its documented history of royal ownership. It had been part of the French crown jewels until the French Revolution, after which it disappeared for decades, eventually resurfacing in England in the 1830s when it was acquired by Henry Philip Hope, from whom it derived its current name. Through subsequent sales and inheritances, it had finally come into Cartier's possession. The meeting marked the beginning of what would become a lengthy negotiation process. The Hope Diamond's unusual cushion cut and rare blue color made it a unique piece unlike anything else available in the market. While stories circulated about the stone bringing misfortune to its owners, these tales were part of the complex history Cartier shared with the McLeans during their discussions. The proposed price of $180,000 represented a significant investment, even for the wealthy McLeans. Ned McLean initially expressed reservations about the purchase, although he would eventually support his wife's decision to acquire the stone. The negotiation process would extend beyond their initial meeting as both parties worked to reach mutually satisfactory terms. The diamond's journey to that point had been remarkable. After disappearing during the French Revolution, it had passed through several hands before reaching Cartier. Each ownership transfer added another layer to its already rich history, making it not just a precious gem, but a piece of tangible history. From the French royal family to Henry Philip Hope, and through subsequent owners, the diamond had traveled across continents and through the hands of some of Europe's most notable collectors. As 1910 drew to a close, the Hope Diamond remained in Cartier's possession, but discussions about its sale to the McLeans continued. The negotiations would stretch into the following year, with various factors influencing the final decision. The complex discussions involved not just the price, but also considerations about the stone's setting and presentation. The question that hung in the balance wasn't simply whether the McLeans would acquire this remarkable blue diamond, but how this potential purchase might impact their lives. Little did they know that their decision would link their name permanently with one of history's most famous gems, creating a connection that would far outlast their own lifetimes. In 1911, after months of negotiations, the Hope Diamond finally changed hands. The McLeans purchased the extraordinary blue stone from Cartier for $180,000, a sum equivalent to several million today. This acquisition marked the beginning of a new chapter in the diamond's long history. The 45.52-carat blue diamond was reset by Cartier into a versatile headpiece that could also be worn as a pendant. This new setting allowed Evelyn to showcase the stone in various ways at social gatherings. She integrated the Hope Diamond into her life with a casualness that contrasted sharply with its royal history and immense value. In one of her more notable displays of this informal attitude, she occasionally allowed her Great Dane to wear the diamond. The early years of Evelyn's ownership of the Hope Diamond coincided with a period of significant social and political change in Washington, D.C. World War I would soon reshape the international landscape, and the McLeans' position at the intersection of media and society through their ownership of the Washington Post placed them at the center of these transformative events. However, the family's prominent position and extraordinary wealth couldn't shield them from personal tragedy. In 1919, the McLeans suffered their first major loss when their 9-year-old son, Vincent, was struck by a car and killed. This devastating event marked the beginning of a series of personal challenges that would test Evelyn's strength in the years to come. The Hope Diamond remained a significant part of Evelyn's life through both prosperous times and periods of hardship. Like many wealthy Americans, she would later face financial challenges during the Great Depression, even temporarily pawning the diamond during this difficult period. Yet throughout her decades of ownership, she maintained a special connection to the stone that distinguished her from its previous owners. As the 1920s approached, the McLeans' lives appeared to be following diverging paths. Ned's behavior became increasingly erratic, marked by growing problems with alcohol and gambling that would strain their marriage. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued to maintain her position in Washington society, with the Hope Diamond serving as a constant presence in her life. The next decade would bring more changes and challenges for Evelyn Walsh McLean. The Roaring Twenties were about to begin, ushering in an era of unprecedented social change and economic expansion. Yet beneath the surface of this apparent prosperity, forces were at work that would test both her fortune and her spirit. The 1920s brought dramatic changes to American society, and the McLeans were not immune to the era's turbulent currents. While the decade began with the glittering excess of the Roaring Twenties, it would end with decisions and events that would fundamentally alter Evelyn's life. Ned McLean's struggles with alcohol and gambling intensified during this period, putting increasing strain on both their marriage and their finances. The situation reached a breaking point in 1927 when Evelyn separated from her husband. Despite their social prominence and the public nature of their positions as owners of the Washington Post, private troubles could no longer be contained within the walls of their mansion. The stock market crash of 1929 ushered in the Great Depression, bringing new financial challenges. Even the wealthy McLeans felt the impact of these difficult economic times. In a move demonstrating how dire circumstances had become, Evelyn temporarily pawned the Hope Diamond during this period. This decision, likely difficult for someone who had maintained such a close connection to the stone, reflected the era's economic realities. The 1930s brought even more significant changes. In 1933, Ned McLean was declared legally insane and committed to a mental hospital. That same year, the Washington Post, which had been in the McLean family for decades, was sold as part of the settlement of Edward McLean's estate. The newspaper that had been such a significant part of their family's identity and influence passed into new hands. Throughout these upheavals, Evelyn maintained her presence in Washington society, though in altered circumstances. The Hope Diamond, when not in pawn, remained a constant in her life. While many of her contemporaries faced similar financial reversals during the Depression, Evelyn's experience was particularly public due to her social prominence and connection to the famous Blue Stone. The changes in Evelyn's life during this period reflected larger transformations in American society. The Depression's economic devastation had reshaped American wealth's landscape, and many formerly secure fortunes proved vulnerable to the harsh economic conditions. The sale of the Washington Post marked the end of an era not just for the McLean family, but for a certain style of newspaper ownership in America. As the 1930s progressed, Evelyn faced her challenges with the same spirit that had characterized her earlier years. While her life had changed dramatically from the days when she first acquired the Hope Diamond, she maintained her distinctive personality and social connections. The diamond, which had witnessed French royalty's fall and European society's transformation, now observed American wealth and society's reshaping through its owner's experiences. The years ahead would bring more changes for Evelyn Walsh McLean. Her ex-husband remained institutionalized, and the future held both additional sorrows and moments of strength. As she moved into the next phase of her life, the Hope Diamond would continue to play a unique role in her story, leading toward decisions that would ultimately determine this remarkable stone's fate. The 1940s brought significant endings in the story of Evelyn Walsh McLean and the Hope Diamond. In 1941, Ned McLean died in the mental hospital where he had spent his final years. Though they had long been separated, his death marked the conclusion of a significant chapter in Evelyn's life, one that had begun with such promise at their 1908 wedding. The Hope Diamond remained in Evelyn's possession until her death, having been her companion through decades of dramatic change in both her personal life and the wider world. The jewel that had traveled from French royalty through various European collections had now been in Evelyn's possession longer than any other private owner. During her ownership, the stone had transformed from a piece of jewelry into something more, a tangible link to history and a symbol of endurance through challenging times. In 1947, Evelyn Walsh McLean passed away at the age of 60. Her life had spanned an extraordinary period in American history, from the mining fortunes of the Gilded Age through 2 world wars and the Great Depression. She had outlived her ex-husband and 2 of her children, enduring personal tragedies while maintaining her distinctive spirit. After her death, the Hope Diamond found a new path. The stone was sold to Harry Winston, Incorporated, marking the end of its longest period of private ownership. Winston would display the famous diamond for the next decade as part of his Court of Jewels exhibition, traveling throughout the United States. Finally, in 1958, he donated it to the Smithsonian Institution, where it has remained ever since. Today, the Hope Diamond rests in the National Museum of Natural History, where millions of visitors each year pause to admire its deep blue brilliance. Its setting has been modified several times since Evelyn's day, but the stone itself remains unchanged, a tribute to both natural wonder and human history. The diamond's permanent home in the Smithsonian represents a remarkable final chapter in its long journey. The stone that once adorned French kings, that traveled through centuries of private collections, and that spent its longest period of private ownership with Evelyn, now belongs to the American public. In its secure display case, rotating slowly under carefully controlled lights, the Hope Diamond continues to captivate audiences just as it once captivated the mining heiress who owned it for over 3 decades, Barbara Woolworth Hutton. On a crisp November evening in 1930, as the Great Depression ravaged the nation, New York City's elite converged upon the Ritz-Carlton Hotel to celebrate the 18th birthday of none other than Barbara Hutton, heiress to the monumental Woolworth store fortune. Upon arrival, the guests, hailing from the most illustrious families of the age such as the Astors, Vanderbilts, Whitneys, and Rockefellers, were greeted by Maurice Chevalier, the renowned French entertainer who was whimsically costumed as Santa Claus. The grand ballroom inside the hotel was a vision of a winter wonderland, adorned with extravagant decorations and a sea of flowers that alone bore a price tag of $50,000, equal to nearly $1 million in today's currency. The atmosphere was alive with melodies from 4 orchestras, and the echoes of champagne cork pops filled the air as the night unfolded, with 2,000 bottles of champagne being served by a contingent of 200 waiters. But as midnight approached, the revelry did not wane. Instead, it escalated with the serving of 1,007 course suppers, and as the night stretched into the early hours, 1,000 breakfasts were laid out for those who had danced through the night. The pièce de résistance of the evening, however, was the party favors bestowed upon the guests. Each attendee received a small jewelry case filled with unmounted diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and sapphires, a lavish token that left the crowd in awe of the hostess's generosity. And the celebration, which reportedly cost a staggering $60,000, equivalent to over $1 million today, was capped off by Barbara Hutton herself as the radiant centerpiece of the evening. Clad in a stunning debutante gown, she embodied the poor little rich girl, a nickname that would cling to her through varied fortunes. Thus, that night at the Ritz-Carlton was more than just a lavish party. It was the heralding of Barbara Hutton's entrance into the world of high society and the public eye. As one attendee poignantly observed, this was the moment when Bobby became Barbara Hutton, debutante, glamour queen, playgirl of the Western world. Little did they know this splendid introduction foreshadowed a tragic life of glamour, heartache, and the eternal pursuit of happiness amidst the glittering yet often unforgiving world of the rich and famous, as we describe the tragic life of the so-called poor little rich girl, Barbara Hutton, heiress to the Woolworth fortune. Barbara Hutton, an emblem of wealth from her infancy, found herself at the center of a vortex of fortune and scrutiny as early as 12 years old, because with the death of her grandmother, Jenny Creighton Woolworth, in 1924, Barbara was left a staggering inheritance that rivaled the tales of fairy tale princesses, $26 million, a sum that would inflate to almost $500 million in today's currency. Even further, her mother's estate cushioned this with an additional $2.1 million in stocks, managed by her father, Franklin Laws Hutton. This trust bloomed to a monumental $42 million by the time Barbara reached 21, crowning her one of the richest women globally during an era marked deeply by the Great Depression. You see, her father, Franklin, a titan in the financial realm and co-founder of the renowned E.F. Hutton and Company, was a master of his craft and his financial moves, particularly his timely divestment before the 1929 market crash, significantly safeguarded and multiplied Barbara's inheritance. Yet, while Franklin navigated the financial storms with acumen, his personal life brewed with scandal. The mysterious death of Barbara's mother, Edna Woolworth, in 1917, believed to be a self-inflicted end linked to Franklin's infidelities, left a young Barbara to stumble upon her mother's lifeless body, an image that haunted her throughout her life. And in the wake of her mother's death, Franklin's subsequent marriage to Irene Curly Baude only deepened Barbara's emotional isolation. Regarded widely as an opportunistic stepmother, Irene's presence ensured that Barbara's upbringing was shuffled among various relatives, leaving her often in the hands of governesses rather than family. Despite these early traumas, Barbara's entry into society was nothing short of spectacular, and her aforementioned debutante ball was absolutely legendary. Now, Barbara Hutton's personal life at its peak unfolded like a carefully choreographed ballet of opulence. She owned sumptuous estates across the globe, from the Japanese-inspired Sumia in Mexico to the regal Sidi Hosni in Tangier. Each home was not merely a residence, but a testament to her wealth and her impeccable taste for the exotic and the beautiful. But her penchant for luxury was not confined to real estate. Hutton was also known for her incredible collection of jewelry, including the famed Vladimir tiara, and her wardrobe was a parade of haute couture from legends like Cristobal Balenciaga and Oleg Cassini. And it was Cassini, commissioned by Cary Grant, who attempted to navigate the tumultuous waters of their marriage through style. Socially, Barbara was a magnet for high-profile gatherings, her debutante ball in New York being particularly notable for its extravagance. Despite the allure, this display of wealth was not without its critics, especially given the harsh economic climate of the Great Depression, and her visibility and lifestyle choices made her a constant subject of media fascination and public critique. By 1934, Barbara's life had inspired both film and song, capturing the public imagination and solidifying her status as a cultural icon, albeit one often viewed through a lens of scorn and envy. This public narrative portrayed her as the poor little rich girl, a moniker that underscored the complex interplay of wealth, privilege, and personal adversity that defined her life. And yet, Barbara Hutton ended her life essentially penniless, lonely, and isolated. In order to better understand how someone could go from $1 million debutante party to poverty, we must roll back the clock a bit and begin with a psychological profile rooted in her uniquely difficult youth. Born into opulence on the 14th of November 1912 in New York City, Barbara Woolworth Hutton emerged as the sole child of Edna Woolworth of the retail empire and Franklin Laws Hutton, a founder of the E.F. Hutton and Company investment firm, making her an instant heiress to one of America's grandest fortunes. Yet the wealth that defined her birthright would also shape a life marred by emotional turmoil. You see, Barbara's upbringing was steeped in material wealth, but plagued by emotional neglect. Her father, Franklin, notorious for his infidelities, was a distant figure, while her mother, Edna, ensnared in loneliness, sought comfort in an affair with Bud Bouvier, Jacqueline Kennedy's future uncle. This chaotic household environment left Barbara profoundly isolated, craving the affection that her fractured family could not provide. And tragedy struck with brutal force at the tender age of 5 when Barbara discovered her mother lifeless, an image that would haunt her for decades. Officially, Edna's death was attributed to complications from mastoiditis, but whispers of a self-inflicted ending persisted, some suggesting the family might have even influenced city officials to avoid probing too deeply into the actual cause. Reeling from this loss, Barbara's subsequent childhood was a relentless shifting of guardians as she moved from one relative's home to another. She spent significant periods at her maternal grandparents' luxurious 60-room Long Island mansion, a place where material excess was abundant, but emotional warmth was scarce. But her grandmother, Jenny Creighton Woolworth, was consumed by dementia, and her once doting grandfather, Frank Woolworth, was ailing. He affectionately called her Princess, but his failing health meant he could not provide the stable affection she so desperately needed. After her grandfather's death in 1919, Barbara's father moved her frequently, each relocation eroding her sense of stability further. Described as a wistful, imaginative, lonely child by those who knew her, Barbara harbored complex feelings for her father, intertwining threads of fear and a yearning for his approval. Throughout these formative years, Barbara's cousin, Jimmy Donahue, was a kindred spirit, and he too knew the cold embrace of wealth, coupled with familial neglect. This bond forged in shared experience became a rare constant in her early life. Now Barbara's education was reflective of her status, with stints at prestigious schools like Miss Hewitt's classes and Miss Porter's School for Girls. However, the luxury of her educational background did little to heal the deep emotional wounds inflicted by her turbulent upbringing. Thus, the imprint of such a fraught childhood left an indelible mark on Barbara Hutton. As she matured, her life became a quest fraught with troubled relationships and a continuous search for the love and stability that her youth had so cruelly denied her. In the next chapter, we'll dive a bit deeper into her marriages and heartbreaks to flesh out the larger story of this tragic heiress. Barbara Hutton's quest for love was as storied as it was heartbreaking, beginning with her first marriage to Prince Alexis Mndivani in 1933. You see, Barbara first met Alexis Mndivani through a calculated encounter orchestrated by Alexis's sister, Rusadana, known as Rusi. And the Mndivanis, a family of social climbers, were known for marrying into wealth, which they often flaunted in high society. Rusi thus arranged for her brother to meet Barbara under the pretense of social gatherings, exploiting Barbara's vulnerability and immense wealth. Their initial encounter then led to a scandalous affair while Alexis was still married to his first wife, Louise Van Allen. This affair culminated in a hasty marriage to Barbara after Alexis's quick divorce from Louise, and therefore, at the young age of 20, the Woolworth heiress married the self-proclaimed Georgian prince in a grand ceremony in Paris. Dressed in a white gown with dramatic shoulders and a sweeping veil, she hoped for a fairy tale ending. Yet the reality was far from it. Mndivani, infamous as one of the marrying Mndivanis, quickly set about spending Hutton's vast inheritance on a luxurious home, polo ponies, lavish attire, and men's jewelry. Their marriage dissolved in March 1935, not even 2 full years after they had exchanged vows. But her divorce from Mndivani did little to deter Hutton's marital pursuits. In May 1935, she entered into marriage with Count Kurt Heinrich Eberhard Erdmann, Georg von Haugwitz Hardenberg Reventlow. This relationship brought her only child, Lance Reventlow. However, like her first, this marriage crumbled by 1941. Barbara Hutton's third marriage to the charismatic Hollywood icon Cary Grant began just a year later, in 1942. The couple's union was highly publicized, partly due to Hutton's immense wealth as a Woolworth heiress and Grant's already established fame as a leading man in Hollywood. Initially, their marriage was marked by numerous social events and public appearances reflecting their high-profile statuses. They were famously dubbed Cash and Cary, a moniker that played on Hutton's wealth and Grant's screen persona, although Grant himself was independently wealthy and did not need Hutton's financial support. However, the relationship began to deteriorate as Hutton felt overshadowed by Grant's growing film career. And despite the initial allure of their glamorous lifestyle, she later remarked that Grant was primarily interested in growing his star power, which she felt was a significant factor in their separation. The marriage was ultimately unable to withstand these internal and external pressures, leading them to divorce amicably without seeking monetary compensation from one another. Continuing her search for marital happiness, Hutton married Prince Igor Trubetskoy in 1947, though this union also ended in divorce by 1951. Her fifth marriage in 1953 to Dominican diplomat Porfirio Rubirosa was notably brief, dissolving after only 53 days. Then, in 1955, Hutton's marriage to German tennis star Baron Gottfried von Kram also raised societal eyebrows given von Kram's known sexual orientation and past imprisonment for, at the time, illegal homosexual activities. Therefore, this union too ended in 1959, further complicating her tumultuous love life. Her final marital attempt was with Prince Pierre Raymond Don Vene Nachampasak, an adopted member of the former royal family of Laos, in 1964. This last venture into matrimony concluded in 1966, closing the chapter on Hutton's marriages. Thus, Hutton's numerous marriages, each ending in disappointment, painted a portrait of a woman endlessly searching for stability and happiness that eluded her. Her romantic endeavors, coupled with her immense wealth, made her a perennial subject of media intrigue and public sympathy. And despite her efforts, lasting love remained just out of reach, and her later years were marked by loneliness and financial difficulties. As we'll see in the next chapter, Barbara Hutton, once one of the wealthiest women globally, witnessed her fortune dissolve under the weight of extravagant spending and financial mismanagement, particularly during the 1940s to the 1960s. By then, her collection of properties worldwide and her incessant travels to exotic locales had marked a lifestyle that contributed significantly to her financial downfall, and her aforementioned tumultuous personal life, marked by 7 marriages, heavily influenced her financial choices. Several of her spouses were accused of siphoning her wealth, with hefty divorce settlements further depleting her fortune. For example, her first husband, Prince Alexis Mdivani, secured a $2 million settlement during their marriage, and another costly union with Count Kurt Haugwitz Reventlow allegedly cost her an additional $1.5 million. These financial drains, coupled with her lavish gifts to her husbands, steadily eroded her vast resources. But Hutton's spending was not limited to her marital affairs. She frequently made impulsive purchases, including costly jewelry and artworks, which continued to strain her finances. Her lack of financial acumen and dependence on others for estate management left her vulnerable to exploitation. Furthermore, entering the 1960s and 1970s, Hutton's life shadowed darker themes as she faced severe health issues and addiction battles, a struggle that began around her son Lance's birth in her 20s, but worsened with age. You see, Hutton's health woes were compounded by her addiction to barbiturates, particularly Seconal, which she used to manage her anxiety and stress. Her substance use, often mixed dangerously with alcohol, led to several near-fatal overdoses and even a coma. In her later years, Hutton's physical health deteriorated significantly. She became nearly blind and suffered from a hip injury causing chronic pain, and her mental health also declined, marked by erratic behavior, mood swings, and paranoia. Increasingly reclusive, Hutton spent most of her days bedridden, dependent on her staff for care. The tragic death of her only son, Lance Reventlow, in a 1972 plane crash, plunged her into profound despair, exacerbating her isolation and depression. She retreated further from the social world that once defined her, moving into an upscale hotel in Beverly Hills to live out her remaining years in seclusion. Her health, both physical and mental, declined sharply during this period, and she grappled with severe anorexia and a debilitating hip injury that rendered her bedridden, while her failing eyesight further disconnected her from the world around her. Furthermore, financial ruin paralleled her physical deterioration, and despite her precarious financial situation, she continued her pattern of giving, often to strangers who paid her any mind, further straining her resources. By the time of her death, it was reported that she had a mere $3,500 to her name, equal to around $15,000 today. But to be fair, this is a figure hotly contested by those close to her, yet symbolic of her dramatic fall from financial grace. Hutton's life came to a quiet close on the 11th of May, 1979, due to a heart attack in her hotel suite at the age of 66. Her passing was a poignant bookend to a life characterized by both dazzling wealth and deep personal tragedy. The public, who had watched her rise and fall with keen interest over the decades, reacted to her death with a mix of shock and sympathy. The funeral of Barbara Hutton was therefore as subdued as her final years were lonely, and it took place in the Woolworth family mausoleum at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, New York, where she was laid to rest among her relatives. The service was attended by only a close circle of family and friends, a muted affair far removed from the lavish social gatherings she once hosted. This solemn gathering served as a reflective homage to a woman whose life had been a complex interplay of immense isolation and public fascination. Dorothy Arnold. Imagine what it would feel like to be a Gilded Age heiress. Your very movements are choreographed by centuries of social expectation. For Dorothy Arnold, each day began with the weight of the Arnold name, a name that opened every door in Manhattan society while simultaneously closing others. Her life was a parade of exquisite moments: shopping expeditions down Fifth Avenue, literary pursuits at prestigious schools, and secret romantic correspondences to suitors delivered on expensive stationery. Indeed, she played her part perfectly, floating through high society in velvet hats adorned with silk roses, her black fox muff keeping her gloved hands warm as she stepped into luxury shops, where even the air seemed perfumed with privilege. Yet beneath this carefully maintained facade of wealth and propriety lay the stirrings of rebellion, of dreams that couldn't be bought, dreams that would lead her toward a destiny no one could have predicted on that fateful December afternoon in 1910. In today's episode, we'll share the enduring mystery of her disappearance, from the facts of the case to the wildest of theories, as we describe the Gilded Age heiress who disappeared, the mystery of Dorothy Arnold. In the grand mansions of Gilded Age, New York, where gaslight cast long shadows across marble floors and secrets whispered behind silk fans, Dorothy Arnold was born into a world where everything had its price, but true freedom remained beyond purchase. The second of 4 children, she emerged into life on the 1st of July, 1885, destined to bear the weight of the Arnold name, a name that opened every door in Manhattan society, yet somehow managed to close just as many around her. And her father, Francis R. Arnold, had built his fortune on the delicate scents of imported perfumes, those invisible tendrils of luxury that wrapped themselves around the necks of society's finest ladies. From his offices at F.R. Arnold and Company, he crafted not merely a business, but a dynasty, one that reached its marble-clad fingers all the way to the Supreme Court through Dorothy's aunt's marriage to Justice Rufus W. Peckham. In fact, the Arnolds could trace their blood back to the Mayflower itself, old money mixing with new in that peculiarly American alchemy that defined the age. and the family mansion at 108 East 79th Street stood as a monument to their ascension, its rooms filled with the heavy breath of wealth, mahogany panels that had crossed oceans to line their walls, Persian carpets that muffled the sound of servants' footsteps, crystal chandeliers that caught and multiplied the light until it seemed the very air sparkled with privilege. Yet within these gilded walls, Dorothy felt the increasing weight of expectations pressing against her chest like a too-tight corset. At the Wadley School for Girls, she learned to move through society like a queen, her chin held at precisely the right angle to suggest both breeding and approachability. And at Bryn Mawr, she dared to dream of something more. Literature and language opened doors to worlds beyond the suffocating parlors of Fifth Avenue. She began to write, pouring her soul onto paper in secret moments between social obligations. But when her stories returned with rejection letters, her family's amusement cut deeper than any editor's criticism. Still, she persisted. In the autumn of 1910, Dorothy began spending more time alone, making mysterious trips downtown. Her father's refusal to let her move to Greenwich Village, that bohemian refuge of artists and intellectuals, only strengthened her resolve. No one who saw her on a crisp December day shortly thereafter could have known that, as she walked away from a candy shop, each click of her heels on the sidewalk was counting down to one of the most baffling disappearances in New York history. The morning of the 12th of December 1910 dawned cold and clear in Manhattan, the kind of crystalline winter day when footsteps echo sharply off brownstone facades, and even the air seems to hold its breath. Dorothy Arnold emerged from the family mansion at 108 East 79th Street, wearing a tailored blue suit that whispered of wealth with every movement. Her black velvet hat, adorned with silk roses the color of twilight, cast delicate shadows across her face, shadows that would soon become permanent in the photographs plastered across newspapers nationwide. In her leather purse lay $25 in crisp bills, a fortune to most at the time, but mere pocket money to an Arnold. The money nestled beside a letter, its contents known only to Dorothy, the paper worn at its creases from repeated reading. This was not the first such letter. Others had arrived over the preceding months, each one bearing a Boston postmark and the distinctive handwriting of George Griscom, Jr., whose very name made Frances Arnold's jaw tighten with disapproval. The streets of Manhattan stretched before her that morning, like the chapters of an unwritten novel. Fifth Avenue glittered with promise, its shop windows displaying treasures that Dorothy barely noticed as she made her way south. At Park and Tilford, she purchased a box of chocolates, the kind she had always favored, wrapped in paper that crinkled with elegant restraint. The sound would echo in the memory of the shopgirl who served her, becoming part of the tapestry of last moments that investigators would later weave together. At Brentano's bookstore, the warmth of literary sanctuary embraced her. Here, among the leather-bound volumes and fresh ink, Dorothy selected Engaged Girl Sketches, a choice that would later be dissected for hidden meaning by dozens of detectives. The book's pages held stories of love and marriage, subjects that had become increasingly complicated in Dorothy's own life since her secret meetings with Griscom in Boston. As she left the bookstore, Manhattan's winter light was already beginning to fade, though it was not yet afternoon. Dorothy's figure, elegant in blue, merged with the crowd of holiday shoppers. She moved toward Central Park, where bare trees reached toward a steel-gray sky like grasping fingers. The park's winding paths offered silent witness to countless clandestine meetings and whispered promises. But whatever secrets they might have held about Dorothy's fate remained locked in winter's frozen embrace. Back at the mansion, the hours began their inexorable march toward evening. The family's dinner hour approached with its usual precision, silver being laid, wine being decanted, servants moving with practiced efficiency through rooms growing steadily darker. But Dorothy's chair would remain empty, her absence at first a mere ripple in the carefully orchestrated rhythm of upper-class life. That ripple would soon become a wave threatening to overwhelm the carefully constructed facade of Arnold family propriety. For as the evening shadows lengthened across Fifth Avenue's fashionable flagstones, Dorothy, Arnold, heiress, aspiring writer, secret romantic, had already stepped into a mystery that would haunt New York society for generations to come. For 6 weeks after Dorothy Arnold vanished, silence wrapped itself around the Arnold mansion like winter fog. Behind heavy curtains and massive oak doors, the family's private agony played out in whispered conversations and furtive meetings with John S. Keith, their trusted lawyer, whose discreet inquiries had yielded nothing but shadows. The family's pride, that great fortress built of old money and older connections, had become their prison. Francis Arnold, who had built an empire on imported perfumes and social connections, found himself facing an enemy that neither wealth nor influence could defeat. Each morning he descended the mansion's marble staircase with ever-grayer features, the weight of his decision to protect the family name bearing down upon him with the inexorable force of approaching disaster. The servants moved through the house like ghosts, careful to avert their eyes from empty chairs and untouched place settings. Mary Parks Arnold maintained her social calendar with mechanical precision, each tea party and charity meeting a masterclass in composed desperation. Behind her perfect smile lay the growing certainty that every passing hour without police involvement pushed her daughter further beyond reach. Yet the specter of scandal, that great destroyer of Gilded Age fortunes, kept her lips sealed and her gloved hands folded properly in her lap. When they finally broke their silence on the 25th of January 1911, the press descended like vultures on fresh prey. The Arnold mansion became the epicenter of a media earthquake that sent shockwaves through every drawing room from Fifth Avenue to Newport. Reporters prowled the sidewalks, their pencils sharp as knives, ready to carve the family's reputation into headlines that would sell papers from coast to coast. The press conference held in the very parlor where Dorothy had last bid goodbye to her mother transformed their private nightmare into public theater. Francis Arnold stood before the flashbulbs, his dignity crumbling like ancient marble as he offered $1,000 for information about his daughter's whereabouts, a sum that seemed paltry against the $100,000 he would eventually spend chasing shadows. Across the nation, Dorothy's face stared out from newspaper pages and police circulars, her story feeding America's growing appetite for mystery and tragedy among the privileged classes. From Philadelphia's railway stations to San Antonio's dusty streets, reported sightings bloomed like desert flowers after rain. Beautiful, brief, and ultimately false. The Pinkerton detectives, those shadows among shadows, followed countless leads that dissolved into nothing. Ransom notes arrived, each one raising hopes only to dash them against the rocks of deception. Even Joseph Lebray's lurid confession of witnessing Dorothy's demise proved to be nothing more than the fabrication of a desperate mind. But perhaps most telling was what remained in Dorothy's room, untouched since that December morning. Her evening clothes, her jewelry, her diary filled with secrets about George Griscom Jr., all the precious detritus of a life interrupted. And there on her writing desk lay a half-finished manuscript, its pages forever waiting for an ending that would never come. Time moves forward with relentless precision, but some mysteries refuse to fade into history's shadows. In the decades following Dorothy Arnold's disappearance, theories bloomed like dark flowers in the garden of public imagination, each one reaching toward its own version of truth. The ransom notes arrived like poisoned pen letters, demanding $5,000 for Dorothy's return, a paltry sum for an Arnold, yet still too much for truth. These missives, scrawled by opportunists who sought to profit from a family's desperation, only deepened the mystery they pretended to solve. Each fraudulent demand drove another nail into the coffin of the kidnapping theory until it lay buried beneath the weight of its own improbability. In the marble-floored parlors of New York society, whispers of suicide drifted like perfume through the air. Those who knew Dorothy spoke of her rejected manuscripts, those paper children she had sent into the world, only to have them return unwanted. They mentioned the weight of expectations that had pressed upon her shoulders, heavier than any fur coat she had ever worn. Some pointed to her letters to George Griscom Jr., where disappointment bled through the ink like a wound that wouldn't heal. Griscom himself became both suspect and theorist. His week with Dorothy in Boston, a chapter that society matrons read between the lines with raised eyebrows and knowing glances. He spoke of her despondency over her failed literary ambitions, of dark hints in her correspondence that suggested an ending she might have written herself. Yet no body was ever found in Central Park's winter bare landscape. No unidentified woman matched her description in any of Manhattan's morgues. The elopement theory gained traction in certain circles, fueled by Dorothy's secret Boston rendezvous and her family's iron-fisted control over her life. Some imagined her on a steamer bound for Europe, her tailored blue suit exchanged for a new identity, her black fox muff traded for the warm embrace of freedom. But this romantic notion, like all the others, dissolved under the harsh light of investigation. As the years passed, Dorothy Arnold's disappearance became more than just another society scandal. It emerged as a dark mirror reflecting the anxieties of an age. In her story, the public found every fear that haunted the Gilded Age: the vulnerability of wealth, the price of rebellion against social constraints, the thin veneer of security that separated the highest echelons of society from the abyss of uncertainty. Francis Arnold went to his grave in 1922, believing his daughter had ended her own life, taking with him whatever secrets he might have held about those 6 weeks of silence. Mary Parks Arnold followed in 1928, her final years marked by the daily ritual of watching her front door, waiting for a return that never came. The case files gathered dust in police archives, their pages yellowing like autumn leaves. Yet Dorothy Arnold's disappearance refused to be relegated to history's footnotes. Her story continues to whisper through time, a reminder that even in an age when wealth could buy almost anything, some questions remained forever beyond purchase, some mysteries eternally unsolved.